to the About That podcast with me, your host, your favorite geek psychologist, your favorite pop culture enthusiast, your favorite queen of the nerds, Dr. Vanessa Hintz. And today, friends, I'm so excited to bring to you all a conversation focused on fandom, the power of fandom, the belongingness that we find in fandom. And I was so fortunate enough to be able to have a conversation this past weekend with three absolutely amazing individuals who are not only super smart and just beautiful, beautiful souls, also are folks who utilize fandom in their professional work. And so the conversation that you all are about to hear was recorded on location at San Diego Comic-Con, which took place in July 2023 amidst the writer's strike, amidst the actor's strike. So needless to say, this year's San Diego Comic-Con was something that was different than that in years past. And I'm not saying that's good, bad, or otherwise, just different. And I want to honor and acknowledge that that is the zeitgeist in which we were having this conversation. And so without further ado, I invite you all to please enjoy the conversation between myself, Justine Mastin, Dr. Tanya Cook, and Dr. Kaela Joseph. I will also preface this by saying, as I mentioned, this was recorded on location in a hotel lobby, y'all. So there is ambient sound. There's people having conversations in the background. There's just a whole lot going on, which is not good, bad, or otherwise. I feel like it gives it a little character. It gives the conversation a little razzle dazzle. So without further ado, friends, please enjoy.
Hi, my name is Justine Mastin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as an author, and so much more. My work focuses on the intersection between pop culture and psychology, and I'm best known for my book, Starship Therapies, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life, which is a self-help book for people who hate self-help books, and incorporates fandom to help people harness the power of stories for their own well-being. I also bring narratives into the therapy space. And I have a new book out called The Grieving Therapist, Caring for Yourself and Your Clients When It Feels Like the End of the World, that also incorporates narratives, but they're original narratives rather than pop culture ones.
I'm Kaela Joseph. I use they and she pronouns. I'm a queer and non-binary licensed clinical psychologist practicing out of San Francisco. And I wear many, many different hats during the day. I program, manage, and direct clinics, mostly in LGBTQ plus psychology and transgender healthcare. And I co-wrote a book with Tanya Cook called Fandom Acts of Kindness, a guide to activism, advocacy, and doing chaotic good, and research pop culture fandoms and all of their glory, including LGBTQ plus representation and activism.
Hi, I'm Tanya Cook. My pronouns are she or they, and with Kaela, I co-wrote Fandom Acts of Kindness. My day job is I'm a sociology professor at a community college near Denver, Colorado, and maybe 7 or 8 years ago I started researching fandom and fan activism and the way that fans use their love of pop culture to engage in community service, charity work, and resisting some frustrating social change and cultural change elements, and use that to kind of make the world a better place.
So thank you all. I appreciate you sharing with us all of your work, but also your fandom. So actually, we're going to start there. That was going to be the last question, but we're going to start there. I'm going to call an audible. Tell me about fandoms that you are a part of and how you feel like they've benefited your life and your work.
So Tanya and I actually met through fandom and wrote our book through the start of this relationship through fandom. The way that we met was through the actor Misha Collins tweeted about Tanya's work, which I will let you talk more about because you are far better at telling that story than I am. But essentially found Tanya through a tweet about that work and was the kind of work that I also wanted to be doing. I was working in healthcare and not in fandom just yet, and reached out, and we were able to have this book collaboration that has turned into now multiple collaborations.
I love it.
More personally and not work-wise, the other thing that has really come out of that particular fandom for me has been a lot of my own identity exploration, and a lot of that I've done through shipping and fan fiction, and then also just fan engagement at cons. And so that also has been a really important piece for me, is that ability to explore identity in a space that was very welcoming of that exploration.
Yes, I love it. And now I gotta hear this story about Misha. Now I gotta hear this story.
Yeah, damn it, Misha. So I'm going to try to do it justice. So a few years ago, again, I had moved to Denver from Wisconsin. I didn't know a lot of people, and I started getting really involved in the supernatural fandom. I just binged this show. I loved it. I was like, Eric Kripke, get out of my head. Because I did have an experience of when I lived in an apartment in college, the neighbors got the single heat of the moment, and they played it over and over and over, and it was torture. And this was 20 years before that episode or whatever. So I got into this, and a friend asked me to review something they were writing about Supernatural and the fandom and the engagement in the scavenger hunt and Random Acts charity. And I said, this is really interesting. This looks like a social movement, right? I have a little bit of background in social movements and sociology. And lo and behold, looking around at fandoms, you could see those connections and those touchstones or early kind of organizations that are going to morph into a social movement. So I kind of wrote up a few ideas about that. I did some very preliminary interviews. Again, it's academics. We're not used to getting a lot of attention, and we're especially not used to a lot of attention very early in the research process. So I go to this conference, I present, somebody in the audience tweets at Misha and says, hey, there's a scholar here comparing Gishwiz to collective effervescence and sociology, and Misha has a background in social theory, which is quite close to sociology and political theory and things. And I was very nervous at this panel because it was a new conference for me. So I leave, I go to get some food, I calm down, okay, that was all right. They didn't, shoo me out of the room or something. We all have that imposter syndrome. And I open my computer and it's exploding. My social media is bing, 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 bing. And I saw on Facebook, Misha Collins tagged you and shared your whole abstract. And I start having a panic attack as I'm well, first I thought, oh, haha, Misha Collins. Yeah, right. It's not him. And it was. And he used it to troll Jared, his co-star, right? And so I kind of replied to that and RIP my Twitter, but that really got a lot of attention on this idea, which is great, but it was super early, right? And I hadn't actually finished the book yet. And so everyone was asking, hey, we love this. Where can we get this book? Well, now you can get it. So that's the good news. Fast forward. And it also brought Kaela and I together. So so thank you, Misha, for giving me a panic attack. It was worth it, I guess, in the end. Yeah.
Yes. That was an amazing story. Also, shout out to the Supernatural fandom, the fandom that just keeps on giving. I love it. I love it. I love it. Justine, what about you?
So it's funny, listeners at home, I don't know if you can hear this, but the lobby that we're sitting in is playing this jazzy version of Careless Whisper, which actually takes me back to a Gishwiz challenge, which was playing Careless Whisper on a kazoo, which I did with the head of John Barrowman that I had made out of duct tape. If you're unfamiliar with Gishwiz, Google it. Unfortunately, it is no longer with us, R.I.P. Gish. But, you can always do weird stuff just to do weird stuff. As a reminder, you can do weird stuff for good. And that's what fandom has done for me. It's done weird stuff for good. My first fandom was Twin Peaks. I was watching it when I was much too young to be watching it. I was probably 10 or 11 when it was on. And Dale Cooper became a source of real inspiration for me, talking about identity formation. When he said, he was asked where we're going, and he said, "I don't know, but it's a place both wonderful and strange." And that opened up a world of possibilities for me, that I could be both strange and wonderful. And that continues to be a source of a lot of inspiration and hope for me, because as a young person I was told how strange I was, that I was a weird child. And yeah, I can be a weird child, I can be a weird adult, and I can still be wonderful. And that's what I've built my practice to be, a haven for the strange to be wonderful. Yeah, fandom has done a lot of great things for me. That we mentioned the Supernatural fandom. I met and connected with amazing people through Supernatural. I have a couple of gripes with the fandom. We can get to that in the fandom griping section.
Yes, we can.
But outside of the corners of griping, fandom has been such a beautiful space and a shortcut to understanding with other humans. You know, I have a tattoo of Baby, the 1967 Impala, on my arm, and people see it and they go, "Baby!" And then they look at the rest of my arm with all the other fandoms and they're like, "Oh, like I understand kind of who you are as a person from seeing which fandoms you have chosen to put on your person."
Ooh. Yes.
Yeah, and that, I think, this is Tanya, that what you're kind of describing in our parlance, I don't know, it's early, I need more coffee, is a collective identity, right? And that's what fandom kind of creates for us, is we share that identity with one another, and then from that kind of implies values and norms, and eventually for a lot of fans that turns into, I need to use these values to do something good in the world, right? And I want to be inspired by Sam and Dean to fight the good fight, or a fandom that's really important to me personally that I didn't talk about is the Xena Warrior Princess fandom, which is, you know, a little older fandom. I think it made a lot of us queer, so which is fair. But yeah, there's still very active, passionate Xena fans who are doing charity work, and those fans have raised something like $28 million for charity since the show started, right, in honor of Lucy Lawless's work with the Children's Hospital in New Zealand, and you know, other like climate change activism. And you see fans of Fandom Forward, right, formerly She Who Must Not Be Named Associated Charity, yeah, and how they're using like popular culture products to kind of educate people about how to do activism, which is just amazing, frankly. So looking at that collective identity, we come together in spaces like we're recording this at San Diego Comic-Con. We come together in these spaces because we feel that collective effervescence, that shared energy, and that kind of reinforces that identity, and then that gives us kind of a boost up on our energy to go do good in the world, right?
Yes.
I think to that same point, for those of us who have marginalized identities, there can also be a way that collective identity signals safety.
Ooh, yes.
So, for example, I was at a psychology conference in San Antonio, Texas recently, and with all of the anti-trans legislation that's happening, Texas is where I'm from originally, and should feel like home, but definitely does not anymore. And I was very uncomfortable being there, very uncomfortable using restrooms there as a non-binary person. And the only place that I felt 100% comfortable and 100% affirmed was walking into the Family Business Brewing Co. outside of Austin, because that is owned by Jensen Ackles and others of Supernatural fandom. I knew that the vast majority of people in that establishment were going to be Supernatural family. They were going to be people that I had at least some shared values with, that I had seen at cons. Even if I didn't know them, there was that safety signaling, and it ended up absolutely being true. I had a very gender-affirming experience there, where someone held the restroom door for me to the men's restroom. not the restroom that I use, but I felt very validated that it was even considered that I might be waiting for that where I was standing. And so I think that safety signaling is also part of that, especially for folks who are also part of marginalized groups.
Yeah, ooh, this is giving me life. Okay, and one thing that you referenced with regard to like this sort of collective identity that I want to sort of talk a little bit about, and sort of this offshooting you referenced at first, Kaela, with regard to fan fiction, right? So there's this collective identity that some people, I think, creatively take, and then they build upon that, right? And so can you all talk a little bit about, first of all, for some people like me, what fan fiction is exactly, and how you feel like that fits into this collective identity, because it is something that is outside the canon of what brings people together, but it is absolutely an essential part, I think, of any fandom.
So what fan fiction is, it's just fiction about the things that we are fans of. It can...
This is for you, Mom. My mom asked me what fan fiction is. This is for you, Beverly.
And what's amazing about it is because, like you said, it's outside of canon, it can be canon compliant, where it's changing a few things. It can be completely non-canon compliant, where it's in a different universe. There can be crossovers with other fandoms, so people are sort of picking and choosing from a menu of all of these different options to build a story. And so it can be a really excellent creative writing exercise. It can also be a form of identity exploration. One of the things that I have loved getting into fan fiction is some of the tags that people use to tag their fan fiction are things that I use in psychotherapy with clients. There are people who will tag things like internalized homophobia, which is when we take negative messages about our identities and internalize those negative messages, and they will explore, and you can tell sometimes from the voice that the writer is coming from that they may be utilizing somebody like Dean Winchester's voice, but they're speaking often to their own experiences and getting to explore those experiences. And that, for me, has been what's really powerful about fan fiction, is that ability to either self-explore through the narrative of writing or self-explore through the narrative of reading, and being able to tailor what you want to see. So, when you're watching TV, you get to see only what the writers and studios put out for you. And with fan fiction, you get to transform that and see maybe a little bit more of yourself or communities that aren't as represented.
Yes.
If I can add to that, I think one thing that lay folks don't understand about fan fiction is just how pervasive it is. There are things we label fan fiction, and there are things we don't, but they're still fan fiction. So technically, and I don't want to be offensive to anyone here, but I would argue Supernatural is fan fiction of the Bible, and some Judeo-Christian mythology.
Hashtag fan fiction of the Bible.
Yes, in many ways. And this isn't the first time you've seen that. A lot of things are influenced by religious texts, right? Also, things like Our Flag Means Death, which we were on a panel about yesterday, is in some ways real person fan fiction, because there are characters in this show that were actual humans who lived, although the show is very, divergent in an AU, if you will. So I think fan fiction is more than you might expect. There is explicit work. There's also general level where there isn't that sexually explicit material, but as Kaela mentioned, it's and as Justine I'm sure can speak to, it's therapeutic in many ways for individuals to grapple sometimes with trauma. And there's some excellent work in the academic fields by Lynn Zabernis and Kathy Larson in Supernatural, particularly about how people writing fan fiction and kind of working through some of those traumatic experiences is almost like group therapy, because even though they're anonymous, other readers can comment and kind of engage and grapple with those really difficult things. And as Kaela mentioned, there are hashtags, so you can find whatever you want, right, in this sphere. If you don't want to read that, you absolutely don't have to. One more point on this. We mentioned collective identity, and when you have an identity that feels like a part of you and you are connecting with that, I think for fans it becomes more than just I like X thing, or I have X t-shirt, or I watch X show. It's I enact an action, I do verbs that relate to that identity. So whether that's fan creativity, like writing creating fan art, cosplay, right? And then eventually a version of that becomes, what we've seen is a version of that expression of that collective identity becomes the activism work and the charity work.
Yes.
And you could not have teed me up better, Tanya. Because, yeah, alley-oop. Sports. Because a lot of the work that I do in the therapy world is what I call therapeutic fan fiction. And it's taking the concept of real person fanfic and applying it to ourselves. So we are all doing fanfic all the time. When you're laying in your bed at night and thinking about talking to your boss tomorrow and what you're going to say and what your boss is going to say and how then, you're going to ask for a raise and your boss is going to flip a table and run out of the room screaming, you're writing real person fanfic. And I often tell my clients, I'm like, are we writing just some really negative real person fanfic right now? Could we shift it a little bit? You're writing this fanfic. Could this fanfic be neutral to positive? And the bulk of the work that I do is pulled from something called narrative therapy, which is all about the stories of our lives. Questioning the stories of our lives, asking, do they serve us? Starting to deconstruct them and make changes as needed. So editing the story of your life. And we can absolutely incorporate fandom into that. We can ask ourselves, what parts of Dean Winchester do I want to bring into my own life?
Or into my bed.
I would like to bring all parts of Dean Winchester into my bed. And I've definitely written some erotic fan fiction on that front.
Ooh, email me them pages. Email me them pages.
Right, but I would invite listeners at home to consider in what ways they already write, and I use write loosely because it might be writing in your own mind, it might be writing in your journal. How do you already write fanfic, and how might you want to write fanfic that serves you better?
Yes. Did you hear that, Mom? Okay. Thank you all for helping my mom and me understand. And we sort of alluded to this when you mentioned She Who Shall Not Be Named. But we know, particularly as members of the Supernatural fandom, shit can go left in fandoms. And I think that for me, as a new Supernatural fan, as a black Supernatural fan, I dipped my toe in the water and then I just jumped all the way in after I watched the whole series. But I think there is still some trepidation on my part in not only Supernatural fandom spaces, but I would argue large fandom spaces as someone, as you mentioned, Kaela, with a marginalized identity. So talk a little bit about what you all have experienced or what you think of as sort of those toxic aspects to fandom and fandom spaces. And I use the word toxic loosely because I feel like it's been appropriated, but, let's interpret that loosely.
So it's interesting that you name that piece about jumping into the Supernatural fandom head first, because I listened to the podcast where you were talking to fans at Las Vegas Con, which we did not know we were both at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we were all there. Yeah, Tanya and I were both there. So as you were talking, no, you're fine.
Sorry.
As you were talking about that, one of the things that I found really refreshing listening to that episode was hearing a new fan's perspective, because there's sort of different generations of that fandom because it's a legacy fandom. It's been around for over 15 years now. And so there's kind of the old guard, so to speak, of the folks who were like OG fandom. There's kind of the folks who came in a little bit later, but we were still there watching the show live. And then there's this newer group of folks that just found it during the pandemic. And
shout out to me.
Yes. And cons now feel very different than they did pre-pandemic, seeing that blend of all three of those groups. One of my friends that I know from Supernatural fandom and cons specifically we were both at San Francisco Supernatural Convention recently, and she named that it feels like we're all at a family reunion, but we're the kind of family that's extended and hasn't really met each other yet. And we're a little trepidatious and we don't really know what to make of one another. And I think, we're going to speak to the negatives of fandom, but I do think that some of that norm setting and coming together to figure out what does this collective identity mean is important. Where it gets toxic is when that is used to oppress people.
Ooh, yes.
And because I came into fandom a little more academically than I did as a fan first, I've always been a fan of things, but I was a very lonely child, and I was very isolated from fandom until I refound it as an adult. And I refound it through Lindsay Burness's work. And so when I encountered toxicity, was like, well, this is expected. This is what happens in social spaces. These are social norms, and it felt easier to navigate. And I recognize that is not what it feels like for everybody.
I have a couple of thoughts too, like not quite as eloquent as Kaela here, but we do have just to plug our book, we do have a chapter about the dark side of fandom and how to kind of negotiate with yourself your participation in fandom and try to set those boundaries for yourself around, I'm not going to engage in this, or kind of, you have some vignettes, I believe, about what if this scenario comes up, how should you react as a person with these values, so we kind of come back to some of that values orientation. And I have a really gross analogy that comes from being a parent to toxicity in fandom. Is it okay if I say that and you can cut it out?
Please do.
Okay.
We like all the gross things.
It's like you're taking a lovely bath with all your friends, right? And you're having a good time in the bath.
Oh, okay.
And then, you know what happens sometimes? But sometimes when children, like small children, are taking a bath together, sometimes there's poopy.
Yes.
There's poopy in the bathtub. And what you have to do as taking the high road is you got to go find that slotted spoon and get the poopy out of the bathtub. So that's my gross analogy that a little bit day drunk Tanya told Kaela the other day, and I just wanted to share that with y'all. So yeah. Anyway, but it's it is possible. It's a lovely warm bath that we're all enjoying. We just want to avoid the poopies. So take your poopies outside of the bath, right? And sorry, but on a more serious note, that can feel alienating, right? You're like, oh, I love this thing so much. There is that assumed shared values position that you have with other folks, but a lot of fandoms are, an eclectic mix of humans. There's always going to be what I call kind of small p politics, interpersonal politics, where there's jealousy, fans get different amounts of attention, or if fans perceive people are getting attention from one of the celebs or one of their favorites, that can kind of come back on that fan. Yeah. And then there's, I don't know if we want to go into cancel culture kind of stuff, and that's quite controversial, and I have lots of thoughts as a sociologist on that, but there's one habit wherein, there's sort of this guilt by association thing. So like if you're friends with somebody and then they've done something that someone perceives as problematic, then you end up getting marginalized because you happen to be friends. Yes. And for me, being a little bit older, Gen Xer, I tend to be very benefit of the doubt, and I tend to have a very different orientation to social media-based communication than a lot of younger folks do, wherein it's not that I'm accepting of problematic behavior, but I'm generally willing to go, okay, wait, what did that person mean? What was the intent versus the impact? And again, not that you shouldn't hold people accountable for their impact, but I think it is important to introduce some of those nuances into our norms around fandom. That said, She Who Must Not Be Named is what we refer to in our work. We created this concept of starticipant, right? A starticipant is someone who's a celebrity who participates in fandom in order to motivate fans to do charity work. So Misha Collins, Lady Gaga at times, I'm blanking on other one, John and Hank Green, anybody who kind of uses that position intentionally vis-a-vis fandom to motivate them, and there's others. We refer to She Who Must Not Be Named as a counter or anti-star participant, because she, in recent years, has motivated people to act together collectively against what she is spewing, right? And then there's conversations about separating art from artists that I will hold off on for now, but that's, I think, an interesting thing to look at, how fans negotiate those relationships when there's been poopy in the bathtub.
Yes. Poop, pee, spit, blood, all kinds of stuff.
I mean, I'm not going to try and top poop in the bathtub. What I'm going to speak to as a therapist, and specifically a systemic and relational therapist, is the relationship that fans have with each other and the relationship that fans have with stars. We've already touched on it somewhat, but there's a great bond between fans, and also there's jealousy between fans, and it's just like a family. You know, the kid who's getting more attention from the favorite aunt or uncle or mom or dad we're mad at them because I didn't get that attention from aunt or uncle or mom or dad, and so I'm going to get you kicked out of the con. I'm going to get you in trouble in some way. I'm going to spread rumors about you. And also with that feeling of closeness that people have, which is beautiful, it can become enmeshed, where we don't know where we end and the other person begins. And so we share things about ourselves that are not appropriate to the boundaries of the relationship. An example of that is, you know, and this is years ago, I don't know if it's still happening, but when Jared Padalecki was very open about his major depressive disorder, fans, I mean, obviously they were very validated because there's a lot of mental illness, people open about their mental illness in the supernatural fandom, but as they would go down the incredibly long lines of fans meeting the celebs, people would tell Jared about how he saved their lives in detail sometimes. You know, to the point of, I heard a story once, I can't verify this, that someone gave him their razor blades and said they were no longer going to try and harm themselves.
Oh my.
And so, like I said, I can't verify, but I do know that people were sharing those stories, and Jared didn't consent to that.
Yes.
We didn't have conversational consent about that. And so the confusion of boundaries, because we feel so close to celebrities, which is, I call fandom attachment, and people smarter than me call parasocial relationships, which are the one-sided relationships we have with celebrities and characters from stories. You know, I can love Chewbacca, but Chewbacca can't love me back.
Sad.
It is sad. Because you've spent so many hours with Jared / Sam, you feel like, Jared / Sam did save my life.
Yes.
So I want to tell him. But Jared / Sam doesn't know you the way you know him.
Yes.
And that's something for folks to remember and not beat themselves up about. But once we notice that maybe we've been crossing boundaries, maybe we need to step back and question, what are appropriate boundaries for this situation?
I just want to follow up real fast on the loving Chewbacca comment. Is that why you have a lint roller in your purse?
Yes. On a slightly more serious note, to also follow up with that, there's something that is unique about parasocial relationships right now too, with the kind of proliferation of social media and how cons have changed. I mean, cons very much used to be, that person sits over there, you sit over here, you maybe get to ask a question. It was still a viewing experience. It is becoming more interactive, and I think that also blurs some of those boundaries, sometimes in very good ways, and ways where it does become a little bit more reciprocal of a relationship, and it is still a parasocial relationship. The boundaries are still different. And going back to what I was saying earlier about how some of those norms that we create through collective identity actually are important, sometimes the norms we create around that are what to say and not to say at a convention, how we sort of police each other a little bit. I don't love that word, but that's how we usually talk about it with norms. And there's a way, again, that can be turned toxic very quickly if the direction people go is don't ever ask about things that have to do with X identity, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, we all do a lot of conventions, and I know that similar to what you're talking about with Jared, the guy who played Eddie Munson in Stranger Things, he has actually been vocal about all of the heaviness that he has gotten because of how many people identify with that character. And if any convention people are listening, I'm for hire. I'm a consultant for hire, but I think that there also is a responsibility for us to, I don't want to say prepare celebrities to have these conversations or stars or whatever, but is there a way that we can equip them better when they go into these situations, right? Which is why I'm a consultant for hire, but also I think, again,
call me.
Yeah, call me, Jared, okay? But I think, is there a way for us to, because I do think there's an opportunity for you to hear someone without, you know what I'm saying? Because I do, and I appreciate what you're saying about the norms and all of these things, because it's hard to tell someone when they're in that vulnerable space, keep that shit to yourself. You know what I'm saying? Because again, there's that's the opposite of in the therapeutic space what we want to do, right? And so I wonder too how we can start to humanize these larger than life figures and not send. I was recently at a Fan Expo and someone said to Carrie Ann Moss, I was in a panel that she was doing, went up to the mic and basically led with, I attempted suicide because of my depression, and it just went from there, which we don't want to stigmatize that, right? You shouldn't say that, and we want to recognize, you know what I'm saying? What is the balance? And I think that's sort of what we're alluding to, and my question too as a marginalized person is who gets to decide what the right balance is, which I think is also, because particularly in the supernatural fandom, there is a spectrum of people who want to tell them everything, and people who are yo, and then everything in between. And so that, I think, we should write a paper on this, but that, I think, is a provocative question, who decides what those norms are and what is the appropriate amount of, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So part of that can be that more personal negotiation of boundaries. So some of the norms that fans create are having seen how actors respond to things, and when an actor maybe gets a little squirmy in a question. And since we've been talking about the supernatural fandom, I thought Alex Calvert did an amazing job at the recent San Francisco convention of addressing a question in a way that was very similar to what I recommend to students that I teach when I'm teaching them how to do therapy, which is you can validate the feeling without validating the behavior.
Yes.
And there was an awkward question with a little too much personal detail. And it would have been very easy to make a flippant joke, to walk away, to stumble over it, validated the feeling that was coming up for that person, answered the question in a very boundaried way, and moved on. In a way that, we as an audience kind of sighed a collective sigh of relief that was navigated well. And then also, I think that fan probably left feeling like my question was answered and not shamed. And I've seen, unfortunately, experiences where people absolutely have walked away, not necessarily from Alex, but from actors in general feeling shamed because, like you said, there's nobody teaching folks how to navigate that parasocial relationship.
Yes. Yeah, and I even think about the sort of correlation with, I think culturally we're having a larger conversation about mental health, and so now I think particularly with the Gen Zers coming up, they're going to tell you everything about everything because they are about that life, and I love it, I'm here for it. How then do people who are maybe not used to that, even I'm a millennial, I'm a black millennial, but we still in my house weren't talking openly about these things, not because it was shame, but because my parents as boomers, they didn't know how to do that, right? And so what is the and I wonder if that expectation that we have of these celebrities and these stars is because we see them as larger than life. So you should be able to deal with this, Alex. Jared, Jensen, get your shit together. And is that a fair assumption to make of them? I think is interesting. Y'all, I hope you are finding this conversation as insightful and joyful as it was for us to have. As you can probably tell from the recording, it started getting real loud in the lobby that we were in. We also had to disperse for some San Diego Comic-Con scheduled activities. So we're going to jump ahead in the conversation to our final thoughts from Justine, Tanya, and Kaela. Please enjoy.
So, final thoughts. I think what we're kind of all coming around to is fandom is incredibly important as identity development. It is incredibly important in terms of finding one another and being able to establish that. And there's ways that we can do that maybe don't push everybody's boundaries and make everyone feel uncomfortable. And not to say that you can't feel a little uncomfortable. Uncomfortability is how you grow. And it can be done in a more respectful way. In terms of where you can find me, Tanya and I have shared social media right now at AK Nerd Fighting on Twitter. And we also, as we mentioned, have the book out, Fandom Acts of Kindness. We are also going to be featured in a book by Lindsay Burness and Matthew Snyder called Soups Ain't Always Heroes that is coming out in October 2023. That book, oh, wonderful. So Justine's in that as well. So Soups Ain't Always Heroes coming out in October about the show The Boys.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that chapter, just a very brief preview, is about the problems of white feminism in our culture in part. Yes. So very fun. And just final thoughts for me are for fans who are doing the creative work, who are doing the good in the world, we see you. And that's what our book was trying to celebrate, was to give you a roadmap for how to do this or how to level up, and also to share inspiring stories and just say, you are our heroes. We appreciate you when you are acting to create that better, more just world you want to see. And again, you can find us on Twitter. I'm pretty findable. Tanya Cook on Instagram if you want to see pictures of my cats or mountain biking and occasionally fandom-related stuff. Together with Justine, just a very little teaser, Kaela and Justine and I are working currently right now on a book about Our Flag Means Death. So stay tuned for more details about that.
Damn, this is tight. Okay.
Yeah, talking about Soups Ain't Always Heroes, the chapter I wrote for that book is called Never Meet Your Superheroes, Become Your Own. Also about identity formation and how the soups can help us understand our own identity. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom. And you can find my books wherever books are sold. That is Starship Therapies, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life, and The Grieving Therapist, Caring for Yourself and Your Clients When It Feels Like the End of the World. And thank you so much for having us, Vanessa.
Thank you. I'm so inspired by these beautiful humans. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. We're going to go enjoy the rest of San Diego Comic-Con. Until next time, beautiful people. What a tremendously awesome, amazing conversation that I had with these folks. Even right now, listening to it back, I'm just filled with so much joy and so thankful of people like Justine, people like Kaela, people like Tanya that are really working both on a personal and professional level to cultivate a sense of belonging in fandom spaces. And so to all of you who may feel some trepidation, some hesitancy to sort of jump into the fandom space, we see you, as we mentioned, we hear you, and we invite you lovingly into these spaces that have become such important aspects of all of our lives. And with that, thank you again, friends, for spending this time with us today. I wish you and your families safety, health, and joy. Until next time, beautiful people.